morning. My name's Martin Docherty. Jeanette, I'm glad to be here tonight and to be invited to come and speak in my hometown. So I'm absolutely delighted to be in Clydebank to speak to you tonight and to an interesting debate in terms of reminding me of what we said at the topic. Who is the best for workers' rights? I saw your poster and I thought it was very interesting. You had Ed on one side and you had Nicola on the other, and who is best to defend workers' rights. I'm maybe going to go out a wee bit of a limb, and I say the best people to defend workers' rights are workers. So I think there's a critical distinction about what political parties put forward as policy and how they relate to workers' rights, and how workers critically hold political parties to account. Without active workers in politics, neither Neil nor I can ensure that we are held to account to deliver what you believe and what you think is critical to enable workers to do their jobs safely and critically, a decent wage for a decent day's work. Now, I'm sure that we are going to disagree in a few things tonight, but I think, essentially, that we will agree on a lot. We might not actually say it in public, but we probably do. There is much, for instance, and I noticed that Neil's got the Labour Party manifesto, that we probably do agree on, but there is a lot that we don't. For instance, we would like to see the full devolution of all employability law to Scotland, to our government in Edinburgh. We made that submission very clear when it came to the Smith Commission. Now, in terms of our agenda, in terms of the living wage, the Scottish Government recently has been funding the Poverty Alliance that many of you in the Trades Council might know, in terms of the promotion of the living wage. Again, because we don't have the powers at the moment, we may do, depending on the outcome of the general election, as to employable law and wage law. The programme of the Scottish Government amounted to an additional £200,000 for the Poverty Alliance to continue to raise the profile of the living. This is what happens when you get a football game outside. The profile of the living wage and the numbers of the companies that are using, not just the public sector but also in the private sector, to 150 was a target, and that's been met on the First Minister at Cllr, the SNP conference. She wants to see that raised to 500 within the year. So that's a key figure for the Scottish Government. There has also been some guidance in terms of the Procurement Performance Act review. You cannot make the living wage mandatory in the conditions of the contracts under Procurement Scotland Action 2014. That's the Scottish Government's legal advice. There are others who would disagree. That's their legal advice. Being a member of the party which is the Scottish Government, I'm going to go with the Government's legal advice. I'm sure we will probably disagree on that. There are also the Scottish Business Pledge. That's not just about private businesses, that's about workers who are in private businesses. Because it's not just about the public sector, but also the private sector. But I also want to say it's about the workers in the voluntary sector. There's an increasing amount of people employed in the voluntary sector. I happen to be one of them. Now, whilst I'm delighted that a lot of so-called voluntary organisations, and this is where I go off message, Janet, and I actually do this quite a lot. A lot of voluntary organisations in our communities are at their wits' end in terms of austerity, and they're paying the minimum wage or just meeting the living wage. What appalls me though, and I'm going to maybe get some criticism from our own party, is the amount of large charitable organisations which run like private businesses, critically in the care sector. I see them every day looking for big contracts, taking money away from local provision, from local organisations, taking income out of local communities, and we're both guilty of that, this administration and the previous administration, of the amount of people working in the voluntary stroke third sector who do not get to maintain a decent day's pay for not only a decent day's work, but working beyond the call of duty. I don't know if any of you here tonight are care workers. Any of you care workers? You're a care worker. Nice to see you. What's your name? John. Jonathan. Joshua. Sorry, I'm going to be a bit deaf, Joshua. I think it's been brought up in a shit workers family. What concerns me critically about the emergence of the voluntary sector in terms of wages, Janet, is this. The investment in the third sector has been doubled in the last 10 years, from 200 million to over 400 million. But I don't see an improvement in third sector workers' wages, and that gives me a grave cause for concern. Now, I could stand up here today and talk about the public sector and the difficulties they face, but I wanted to reflect on private experience for those who are meeting the contract needs of local authorities and also of national government. I just wanted to set the scene there, and I'm not going to say too much because I think I want to be more in a debate, more about discussion, because I'm sure we can get into a ding-dong about party policy and about manifestos, and there are some differences, but I think there's a lot of shared cause in the room tonight. So I'll be happy to take the questions when they come, and take them in more detail and expand a wee bit further. So thank you.
Can I say I'm really pleased that the Trades Council invited me. I'm a member of West Lothian Trades Council, a very active member of West Lothian's Trades Council, and have been for some time and always will be. And I can see the work that Trades Councils do, I think, is vitally important. And I know this is very active Trades Council. Tommy always sticks up the different meetings and events that he's having, and I think it's particularly important at the time in the run-up to elections, but also this week and next week in particular, when we've got International Workers' Memorial Day, and we've also got May Day, so it's a particularly important time for the trade union movement. And we've just had the STUC conference last week, which I attended. I see it as my role when I was elected to the Parliament to do as much as I possibly can for trade unions. I'm a member of Unite and the EIS, and I've worked with almost every trade union on issues, a whole range of issues, and it will be the role that I see myself playing as long as I'm in that place, because I think that is a vitally important piece of work to be done. Now, this is a huge election for Scotland and for workers across the UK. We have a choice whether we want an economy and a society that works in the interests of ordinary working people, or whether we continue with a policy that serves only a privileged few. A choice whether we continue with a government that recently gave millionaires a £45,000 tax cut, yes, £45,000, at the same time as cutting support for some of the poorest and most vulnerable people, and whether we continue with a policy that is designed to create and increase inequality, unfairness and poverty at one end of the social scale, and eye-watering wealth accumulation by a small number of people at the other end. That is the choice for us at this election, in my opinion. But I was asked by the Trades Council to speak in particular about what is best, or which party would be best for the rights of working people. Well, from my party's point of view, I want to explain why I believe that this is a huge opportunity for working people to see an agenda come forward that would materially change their lives, whether in Scotland, Wales, England or elsewhere in the UK. And we can choose that Tory way of cuts to living standards and conditions, or we can choose a very different approach. We can choose to increase the national minimum wage and use billions of pounds that's at government's disposal in procurement to extend the living wage significantly. If we did that, the lives of many Scots would be improved dramatically. We can use procurement to increase the number and the quality of apprenticeships, and we're committed to giving free bus travel for apprentices as well, because they're some of the poorest paid people in the country when you see the rates of pay that apprentices get. We can assure that every care worker, and I was very pleased to hear Martin say that, social care, in my opinion, is the biggest scandal in Scotland at the moment. The unspoken scandal in Scotland at the moment. 15-minute care visits. People in long enough, as one carer told me, to hear the ping of a microwave before they can run out the door. Care workers not receiving travel time. Some of them having to buy their own uniforms. Not allowed any time to travel between clients, that's included in their day. One young girl who's the same age as my daughter, has just left school. She spoke to me about her experience as a carer. She wants to work in social care, that's the career she sees ahead of her. And she got a job with a private care provider. She had 4 days training in an office. And then on the 5th day, she was sent out with her first list of clients. 30 of them. 30 of them in one day. And she was supposed to be on 15-minute care visits. And finishing, I think she started at 7:30 and was supposed to finish at 4:30 or so. She went through her day, and her day started off badly when she visited an elderly gentleman who had a personality disorder and was abusive towards her. But she hadn't been trained how to deal with that man. So she was terrified, she didn't know what to do. A few visits later, she had to visit another older man who had a catheter in. She didn't even know what it was. And yet she was expected to deal with that. And her day went on like that. Supposedly to finish at 4:30, she finished at 10 o'clock at night. And her father told me that when she came home and explained what happened in her day, he said to her, "You're not going back because you're a danger to both yourself and the clients that you're supposed to be looking for." Absolutely horrendous story. But that's not unique. That's the story that we're getting from more and more people. What are we doing to our elderly and vulnerable people when we have a system like that? And the system is caused because council budgets are being slashed and councils are contracting out because there's no other option. And then the competition for tenders is based on the lowest price. We have to get away from that. We have to provide services, particularly caring services, that are based on the quality of care provided and not a race to the bottom and wages and conditions and all the rest of it. We can also choose to end, and again this is relevant to care, the insecurity that people have in the workplace, that 0 hours culture that eats into people's family life and their relationships and causes so much misery. 100,000 Scots would benefit, mostly young people who are stuck on 0 hours contracts, not all of them young people, and many of them will be in this town, and Labour is committed to get rid of them. We can choose fair taxation, so that for the lowest paid workers we have a 10p starting tax rate that gives them more money in their pocket, but for those at the top they get a 50p tax rate, so we bring in more money to pay for our public services. That's fairer taxes. We can stop the abuse of workers by employment agencies, another scandal. Expand free childcare, so women in particular can get back out to work, but so can dads of young children. We're going to double paternity leave and increase paternity pay. We can have a tax on the bonuses of the bankers who created the financial crisis in the first place and use that money to get young people back to work and into education and training. Impose a tax on houses over £2 million in value. I'm sure, like in the community that I live in, there ain't too many of them, but there's a significant number across the UK, and because the way in which the tax system works and the Barnett formula works, we will get additional funding because of that. And that can go to pay for more nurses and doctors in our NHS, which is under huge strain at the moment. We can invest in our young people. We're at £1,600 allocated to every young person who's not at university, college or in a modern apprenticeship. We can build new council houses, desperately needed new council houses, and control rents in the private sector. Some of what's going on in the private sector is outrageous. Abolish the hated bedroom tax. Protect our communities from fracking. We can make it legal for workers to exploit migrant workers. Outrageous practices going on in the exploitation of migrants. And we can take action to end, in particular relevant to the Trades Council, the heinous practice of blacklisting of people for trade union and health and safety activity, particularly in the construction industry, but not solely the construction industry. And we need to take action on tax dodging. If you or I don't pay our taxes, they would soon have us over the coals for it, but there is systematic, obscene tax dodging going on, and we have to end that. So we can have all of that if we have a Labour government standing on a progressive workplace manifesto that would materially change the lives of working people. And we know that the Tory plan, we've heard all about it today, is for another 70 billion in cuts. And you know the thing is, Osborne didn't need a global financial crisis to cut public spending. It's in his DNA to do that. That's what they believe in. So they didn't need any crisis for that, and they would do it again and again and again with glee. So this is a crucial election. We must get rid of those posh boys running the country at the moment, and we must have an agenda for ordinary working people. And people speak about austerity. I was watching a lecture the other week by Professor Prem Sika. He spoke at the Morning Star conference that I couldn't get along to, but I watched it. And he says it's not austerity. Let's put that word to bed. It's the ritual and organised humiliation of working people. That's really what austerity is about. So I believe that in the past, it's been the labour movement, the trade unions working with people in the labour movement and the Labour Party that's delivered the big social change that we've seen over the decades. It was that movement that gave us access to universal education. It was that movement that created the welfare state and the National Health Service. It was that movement that got us rights at work, and it was that movement that delivered the national minimum wage. And I think it's that movement, working people joining the government, campaigning, agitating, and forcing government to do things that's in the interest of working people. That's what's best for working people here, and that's what's best for people across the UK.
Can I maybe just come in on the volunteer? Some of you in this room will know, I know the councillors from both sides, the council will know that I've been involved in community and volunteering organisations in this community for over a decade, and I've worked very closely. Councillor Casey at the back, Councillor Brown, Labour SNP, worked with two administrations very closely in an employed capacity in terms of volunteering. One of the critical elements, we know, for instance, there's over 2,000 active volunteers within West Dunbartonshire. The highest proportion of them are in Clydebank. Technically, the DWP, non-devolved, reminds us every time they tell us that you're allowed to volunteer, that's you and me, your free will, up to 15 hours a week. What we're now finding with universal credit, and I'm sure there'll be broad agreement on how appalling universal credit is that if you're a volunteer, quite frankly at this moment in time, we don't have a fecking Scooby how often you're allowed to volunteer for your own worth and for your own motivation. Nothing to do with the fact that it might be benefiting you, getting you out of the house, and it ends up being a mandatory through community placement, which has been forced through by the coalition. So when it comes to that, you'll find common cause across this table. Because people, when it comes to volunteering, it's a free will activity. It's not something that should be mandated, because guess what? That's no volunteering, to be blunt. Volunteering is something you might want to do to help somebody else, or motivated to do to learn something new, or to give something, which most people will do it because they want to give something back. Mandating somebody through the DWP to volunteer, let's get this straight, it's not volunteering. Okay?
I disagree with probably anything there. I personally have been involved in many voluntary organisations over the years, and I think it's one of the greatest things that goes on, particularly in working class communities, that people are involved in very grassroots activity, helping older people, young people, whether it's through sports, football, various different things, or creating new community organisations to bring more funding into the community. And you know, volunteering is absolutely central to our community. God knows what kind of situation we would be in if there weren't voluntary organisations in order to provide a range of services and options for people.
Neil, you mentioned that the Labour Party has been at the forefront of the Labour movement. Firstly, the Equal Pay Act was introduced in 1970, and women are still waiting to get equal pay, despite a lot of talk over the decades from the Labour Party about getting equal pay for women. You removed clause 4 from the Constitution, which really gave working working class people the only real political alternative. We've spoken about, you know, how things are going to affect people economically, and what both the parties will do to increase people, improve people's economic situation. But we've got a political future as well. And we're removing clause 4 in favour of common ownership from the table, despite the fact that they're coming and the rest of come in offering us all free choice. It's not much of a choice when you take the only political alternative that working class people have got, which is really, as far as I'm concerned, is socialism, when that has been removed from the table. For years now, as I'm often write into the local newspapers, I have to keep reminding myself to use the class word. You've almost, I would call it cultural imperialism, you've almost erased the whole class politics in the situation from the political...
Could I maybe, I'll let you continue, but could I maybe just ask you to be careful about who you're saying you, because it's certainly not me, because I talk about class politics all the time. Right. So,
okay, Neil, we have met before.
Yes, I know.
Well, obviously I'm referring to you're not Tony Blair, of course. Not Tony.
Thank God.
Watch your mouth, thanks.
We'll come back to him later.
Right, so in addition, we're talking about the party as a whole. As well as that, the party, the policies of the party, the trade unions themselves say this, that I think I got this information, I think it was one of the firemen's union, I think it was, of the PCS. The Labour Party has privatised more jobs than Margaret Thatcher. They haven't changed, they haven't altered the anti-trade union laws. And I come back to the point that Martin started off on, but then moved away. When are we going to get, when are the working class people actually going to get inalienable rights? At the moment we have to ask permission to use the land, we have to ask permission to work, and we have to ask permission to access capital. We're always waiting, and then when the banks go up, now we're waiting again, and we're going round to food banks and begging for food. So, you know, these policies are all very well and good, but I think the politics have to change big time as far as the Labour Party is concerned.
Yeah, I would not disagree with you on the issue of that we have to move our politics, but actually I mean I see you're sitting with an SNP badge on, and that entirely your prerogative, and that's fine. You know, we can have that debate. I don't.
I'm not a member.
Right.
I've got a Labour for Independence badge on as well.
Well, you've got a Tory one on as well. Cover these ones. Cover these ones. Can I say it then? Is it your belief that you have more chance of moving towards a socialist society by voting nationalist? Is that what you're telling me?
The reason why I'm supporting the SNP is to get Scottish independence. And once we get Scottish independence, then we can maybe start talking about. I was really looking forward to get to the Constitution and really get politics back on the agenda that way.
Can I maybe, sorry Neil, I suppose Neil and I are probably cut from the same cloth as we are all in this room, to be blunt. And, sorry Jimmy, I know your thing needs to be up here. I'm quite loud, so I'm getting there as well. As a member of the Scottish National Party, my belief has always been a very critical point that you mentioned, Jim, and I've known Jim for a long time, is that sovereignty lies not in a parliament or in an individual. Sovereignty does not lie in the largest unelected chamber outside of China. It lies in the people in front of me. That dictates my politics. And when I lose sight of that, that's when your politics moves away from the sovereignty not only of the people in front of me, but the entire community. That is a critical element that we have to to work, for me, that's where I work from. If I, for instance, are to be elected by the community that I come from on the 7th of May, it's not for 1 minute to cross the chamber of the House of Commons to see that I believe that they are sovereign. My sovereign sits in front of me tonight, and it's in North Kilbowie, it's in Radnor Park. That's where the power of this community lies. And I just maybe wanted to challenge one thing. Sorry, Neil, I know we're trying to be consensual.
No, please don't.
And I think we have common cause, because I think sometimes our party hierarchies get caught up in the minutiae of party politics. And I don't usually fit that. I think they get a wee bit scared when I won the SNP nomination. I think it sent a few kind of reverberations. But let's go back a wee bit. I want to go back to a wee bit back. I want to read a wee bit of a speech, just a paragraph. 2 paragraphs. Justice in society and at work. People at work should have the stake in the companies for which they work. Do I disagree with that? A young country gives rights, but demands responsibilities. Leave the battles of the past. Ballots, peaceful picketing, proper conduct of disputes. These laws are staying, we know. But there will be new rights for all individuals at work. Yada yada, there will be an end to 0-hour contracts. That was delivered by the future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, in Brighton in 1995. That has not changed. But the difficulty we now face is whether we force a change in direction through a new politics, or we go back to the old politics. This country's not the same. Whether you voted yes or no, frankly, I'm no interested. We've had that discussion. This discussion at the moment is the UK election. And we have to, as a community, reassert our sovereignty to change direction of the bloody ship they call the Palace of Westminster. That's what we need to do in May.
Thank you. Well, first of all, once again, I'd like to thank the Clydbank Trades Council for organising this meeting and for the speakers coming. The Trades Council here, I'm not a member of any political party, the Trades Council here have done quite a lot. But I really Stirling would consider the resources or the resources they don't have and bringing such issues as tonight in front of the people. They put it in a word, they've punched well above their weight. However, as I say, I'm not a member of any political party, but I like to give credit where credit's due. I'd like to thank you for the work you tried to do in the Scottish Parliament about making the consultancy firms more accountable and having to be transparently registered as a body open to the public. I'm grateful for that. I'm disappointed at some of the methods it was using, well, in my opinion, to be obstructive. But however, what I would like to say is there's quite a lot I would agree with you. Jim's already covered some points, but if it's down to who we can trust, if it's down to who we can trust, the present leader of the Scottish Labour Party has employed a Mr. Tiernan, was it Matt Tiernan? Who went to a Tory party conference and actually said that the great Thatcher wasn't Thatcherite enough, that he himself would have liked to have seen the London Underground privatised. The London Underground privatised, and much more about how really capitalism is quite good, there's nothing wrong with capitalism and so on and so forth. We have a local MP who, knowing the poverty in this area, voted with the Conservatives to have the cuts. You had, what? Well, the point
I'll answer you when you're finished. I'm being courteous to let you finish.
The joint, Hart and several other MPs joined the lobby for the Tory spending cuts, the building spending cuts. Ed Ball, Mr Murphy had said there'd be no further cuts in Scotland, that's it, but his Joanna's, Chucker and Bald's quickly slapped him down. So how can we believe, I believe you as an individual, so how can we believe, and when Jim said he didn't even repeal the anti-union legislation, how can we believe that? Now, if I could ask the SNP candidate a question, it disgusts me that even the Labour Party are still going to spend the billions on private, on the better things to be spent on. But he's done a U-turn under NATO. How do we know you won't do the same if it suits you? How do we know? And secondly, I have never heard Nicola Sturgeon yet say that one of her demands on if there is a coalition government will be to repair the anti-trade union laws. They've promised to say they will reverse the social contract. I'm glad to see that. But as yet, neither Labour, the SNP or the Tories have said what they would cut. Now, Balls is on record to say there will be cuts, welfare cuts. So, do you know where they'll cut them? I'd like to know.
Okay, I'll come back. The first point I'll answer directly. The detail that they've given is that they will cut the 5% of the richest pensioners will lose their winter fuel allowance. 5% of the richest pensioners, okay? And they have said that there will be a cap on, there will be a freeze on child benefit, okay? And there will be, in order to boost money coming in, there will be a major clampdown on tax avoidance, okay? Now, I'm going to answer quite a number of the points you raised, because I always do my best to directly answer people, because I get really frustrated when people don't answer direct questions, okay? So, you said about Mr McTernan. Nobody's voting for Mr McTernan in this election. You're voting for your local representative. And what I would ask you to do is look in detail at the Labour manifesto that's been put forward. It is the most radical manifesto in 25 years, without any shadow of a doubt. And what I really appeal to people is to look at the detail. So on things like 0 hours contracts, the difference is Labour is committed to abolishing them. The SNP manifesto says we will consult with businesses and unions on 0 hours contract. Consult, what does that mean? On things like the abolition of tribunal fees, Labour has said we will get rid of tribunal fees. Not a word in the SNP manifesto. So these are things that I think you need to look at the detail of. Don't look at the propaganda that's out. And I say that from me as well. Don't listen to my propaganda because...
I'm sorry, Chair, but what you call propaganda coming through the mouths of senior Labour Party figures. I'm not disagreeing with what you say, right, some of the other things that I think would be welcome. I mean, take council housing. This council under both administrations have transferred council houses into housing associations. So,
I'm trying to come back and finish the points that you raised.
Labour doesn't reverse all these policies of Thatcherism.
Let me come back to the points you raised.
Who can we trust?
You very rightly, and I thank you for that. Congratulate me on the issue of bringing in a bill on lobbying, because the influence of big business in particular on our politics is something that needs exposed, and it needs exposed through a register of lobbyists. Not just at the UK Parliament, they've brought in a register which is a disaster because they wanted to cut trade unions out of any activity in the run-up to general elections. We need a genuine register and we need it brought in Holyrood. Now I took that bill through so far and the Scottish Government, as is their right, they took it off me and said they would legislate. 2 years later, nothing has happened and we need that in as soon as possible. Can I say, and on the final thing, you said that Labour MPs voted for austerity or voted for cuts, is that what you said? Yeah. So the myth that's out there is that Labour MPs voted for 30 billion further cuts. It is not true.
Well, they didn't go in the lobby.
It is not true. If they voted for that charter of budget responsibility, that there is no mention in that of any figure. There's no any detail or any figure. What it says is they will move to balance the budget. That's what they say. That's what they say. There is no evidence whatsoever, and there's no truth in the matter that people went through and voted for that.
Can I just come in? I know you'd asked me a couple of... Sorry, can I ask your name? What's your name?
George.
George, if I'm elected in May and there's a vote about Trident, take my words for it, they can cut my legs off before I vote for Trident.
You better say the same about NATO.
Bear with me, I'm not going to... Take my word for it, NATO caused a lot of angst in the SNP. A lot of angst. And there was clearly an issue that we have failed to do. I personally don't agree with being a member of NATO. So we can have that discussion in the SNP. We had a vote for it, George. Sadly, we voted for it. But that's what happens when you have a democracy. People debate it, they discuss it, and take my word for it. And one hell of a debate, not just at party level, at the conference level, all the way down to the branches. Take my word for it. Clydebank SNP didn't vote for NATO. I can tell you that right here and right now. I wanted to come maybe to a couple of facts about some issues that we made about 0 hours contracts. Neil and I are probably in the same spiel. We're probably really agreeing with each other. But what I find difficult was on Tuesday night when the Labour candidate at the hustings in Dunbarton said, we're banning 0 contracts, but no oiling. So that's on public. And bear with me a wee second, George. The Labour candidate did say, you know, I was at a door the other week and a young guy said to me, I hope they don't ban our 0 hour contracts. I'm a student, I quite like it. So we're not really going to tackle it with students. That was said publicly in the public hustings in Dumbarton football ground on Tuesday night. So I'll leave that to my challenger in terms of the candidacy for the possible parliamentary candidate for this constituency. In terms of winter fuel payment, taking away from the 600,000 richest pensioners, well, by Christ, it'll cost a hell of a lot more money, as far as I'm concerned, to do the means testing for 600,000 folk to come off winter fuel allowance. But I'm a universalist. You might have worked your way up the top from hee-haw, bugger all, but you've paid into the system. And the post-war consensus, which this town knows all about, was about universalism. We didn't suffer that and go into the 1945 consensus to set up a system of welfare that meant if you made your way, we'll just take your money, but that's fine, because you don't know how far ever in life someone's going to fall. So I would oppose to that. And also when it comes to other workers' rights, you talked about housing, George. Somebody talked about housing, I think it was George. It's the Scottish National Party that ended the right to buy new properties in Scotland, council properties. It was the Scottish National Party that ended the right to buy of housing association property. And it was the Scottish National Party that ended the right to buy of all other social housing in Scotland. I'm delighted to belong to that political party that ended it. And what made me really angry was when I saw Ed Miliband up and they were talking about extending the sale of housing association homes in England. And we've all got family, brothers and sisters living in some of the most deprived communities of England. I've seen what places like Sheffield look like. It's like a bloody ghetto. The ghettoisation of poor communities because they can't access even the limited housing at all that we have. And he stood up agreeing with a Tory policy to extend even further the sale of our assets across the communities of England and Wales. And that was a Tory policy. He agreed to it. He agreed it. He said it on the telly. He did. Now, and let me just remind what we have here in the discussion in terms of housing. Our assets, not the government's, our assets. When it comes to this point, that when it came to the possibility to end the sale of council housing from 1997 until 2007, when the SNP won, nothing was done. Actually, the Labour administration extended the right to buy into the registered social landlord sector. So there's huge difference, there's huge points about welfare and also workers' rights. Workers' rights are also about not just having a decent wage and good health and safety, it's about access to accessible, decent housing. And that's a big question for everybody.
I have to come back and I mean, rewriting history is just phenomenal. I was a housing officer in Livingston from 1997 to 2001. 1997 to 2001, with a housing association. No new tenant had the right to buy at all at that time. So you're rewriting history. That is utter nonsense. And that's for Miliband agreeing to sell off the house.
Particular housing
No, it
association.
wasn't. No, it's legislation. It's legislation.
Right, John, play nicely.
No, it's not. I mean, we can just. I mean, I'm up for the political dogfight, but come on, we need to actually tell.
Where did the policy come from? That's my question. Where did the policy actually come from? Was it from the local housing association?
No, it's statutory. You have to do that through statute.
Okay, and you said what year?
1997 to 2001, I was a housing officer.
Okay, I'll look that up later.
Please do.
then.
And George, you don't need to worry about London Underground because Boris Johnson's doing a good job of decimating
Oh, I'm
it.
glad to hear that.
That's my work
No, the
colleagues.
point is, I should have congratulated Martin on the SNP ending the right to buy, but I think it should have been a shorter time scale. I'm sorry about
Should have been quicker, George.
Right, there's quite a few wanting to get in now. Right, you were wanting to.
Hi, can I start off by saying that I currently work for the NHS. I've worked in the voluntary sector in the past, but I've also lived down in England, so I've got quite a few different perspectives on the stuff that's under discussion at the moment. Now, I'll pick you up, Neil, and thank you for coming here, but what you said was that we are voting for a local representative in this election. I'd like to know, why is Gemma Doyle not here as the counterpart? Because you've also said that you're West Lothian.
Yeah, I'm here because Tommy invited me.
Okay.
And Tommy's a friend of mine.
Okay.
He's a comrade of mine.
That's cool.
We're in a different party, but he's a comrade.
And you also mentioned about the bedroom tax, but it was Labour that actually instigated the Labour reforms, the welfare reforms. And that is a matter of record. Everybody knows that.
No, that's a matter of what you believe.
Oh,
and that's not a matter of record of
now, and your belief is that the welfare reforms were instigated when? When do you believe that they were instigated? Because my understanding
Labour
was
did not
that
introduce the bedroom tax.
No, they introduced Lord Freud's.
Labour did not introduce the bedroom tax. Was introduced by the Conservatives.
True, but apart from the bedroom
This
tax,
lady's asking
a lot of these policies that are carrying on with vengeance was, firstly, as Jim mentioned, introduced by a Labour party.
Let me tell you what happened with the bedroom tax in Scotland. Right? John Swinney said, when challenged on the bedroom tax, to use powers in the Scottish Parliament to mitigate the bedroom tax. He says, we won't do it because we won't let Westminster off the hook. That was his quote. And that only changed when a Labour MSP introduced a members' bill in the Scottish Parliament to mitigate the bedroom tax. And that was going to go right through and would have meant that the SNP would have had to have voted down. And they were embarrassed into supporting our members' bill that ended the bedroom tax. Had that not happened, you'd still have the bedroom tax in Scotland. That is fact.
it was not Labour that ended the bedroom tax, it was SNP policy.
Yes, because they were forced to by actions of Labour members bringing forward legislation.
Which Labour brought in the first place.
No,
The legislation left it open for that.
Totally government policy, for goodness sake. No, could I
Right,
Somebody
hold
chair
on,
the meeting.
hold on.
Somebody chair the meeting.
I don't want ones talking over one another.
Well,
Have you finished making your points?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes.
Right, Jim?
Yeah.
And then it's
If there's one thing I'm sure that we'll get a unanimous agreement about in this meeting tonight, is that we want the Tories out of 10 Downing Street. That is the absolute paramount question facing every single voter. I lived through the Thatcher years and I thought nothing could be worse. How wrong I was. This is worse. and we really have got to make up our mind how best we can get rid of this government, and that is the absolutely key issue. Now, we're talking about workers' rights, and one of the biggest impediments to understanding the nature of the struggle for workers' rights is the power of the media and the extent to which it distorts the truth. The biggest impediment, in my experience, in terms of helping working people to see the truth, is to get them to stop reading The Sun. Because The Sun is the biggest distorter of truth you could possibly encounter. And how Alex Salmond can have such a cosy relationship with Mr. Mudd really defies logic. Now, people have, with justification, been making critical points about aspects of Labour Party history. I'm not a member of the Labour Party, never have been. I'm a member of the Communist Party and have been all my life. But the simple fact of the matter is this: if we are going to be historically accurate, all the important social gains that have been placed on statute in this country over the last 100 years have been enacted by Labour governments. That is beyond dispute. The National Health Service, comprehensive education, the repeal of the 1927 Trade Union Act, during the Wilson years, equal legislation in terms of sex and race, Health and Safety at Work Act. I mean, you can go through it all. Tribunals, the right to written contracts. I mean, the history is there. And that doesn't mean that we don't criticise Labour. Of course we do. And I know that Neil Findlay is a very severe critic of the new Labour period in the history of his own party. But the simple fact is that if we are going to change anything in any fundamental way, we need to get rid of this government. And when we talk about workers' rights, there's two kinds of rights. There's the rights that are legislated by Parliament, and that are the rights that are fought for by trade unionists. And the biggest impediment to workers engaging in effective struggle was the legislation placed on statute by Thatcher during her term of office. And unfortunately, much of that is still in place and has got to be repealed. But the key thing for me is to get rid of this government, and in the aftermath of that, to mount the biggest united struggle of working people through the trade unions, the people's assemblies, to force a Labour government to go much further to the left, which I know Neil Findlay would wish.
Could I advertise the Morning Star?
Could I say, I was just going to say that. I get the Morning Star delivered to my office every day in Parliament. And I would encourage anyone here, if you want to read what's going on in the world and get a decent perspective on what's going on in the world, buy that paper and subscribe to everything. It needs supported by people across a broad range of political views, and is supported by people with a broad range of political views. Tories and Liberals need not apply right enough, but I would encourage you to support it.
You can pay me later, Tommy. Gentleman over there, and then...
See what we did history again. I worked all my life in the ship, that's from 15 to 65, except for 2 years in the army. Half my life it was the Communist Party, the other half the Labour Party. And I voted for Union in October. One Fluxy had to leave the Labour Party because the Communists got it completely wrong. The Labour Party did deliver all these things that it said, but the present Labour Party isn't fit for purpose. It will not deliver, and you're going to look at that and tell the truth. Finished. And I'd like to support you in everything you've seen, you, but you have no influence whatsoever in the Labour Party. That's the problem. There's no democracy in the Labour Party. It's run from London, and that's it. The muffled sort it is. I'll tell you why. Over your life, look at your life for the last maybe 20, 30 years. Tweedledum, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, Tweedledee, Labour, Tory, Labour, Tory. The rich get rich, the poor get poorer. Every shipyard in this country has been shut down except Yards now. That's how bad it is. Never repealed the trade union rights now. We're in a trade council meeting tonight, and one of the most important things we've got today is give freedom back to the trade unions. I was a shop steward most of my life. That meant me could call a meeting. and they would have wanted almost to a certain extent. I'm not wanting to go back that far, but we could have a ballot in the workplace there and then. We didn't need postal ballots with the paper influencing the ballot. We've got less training human rights in almost every European country at the moment. In France, if you've got 50 people in the workplace, you get a works council. And that's terrible. I'm saying to you quite clearly. The Labour Party's French man, the MP was here, we've heard of you, Lord John McFall, Lord John Reid. I mean, it's a kid on in the Labour Party. And unfortunately, you're in the wrong party. You know, that is a major problem. And one thing that hasn't been touched on in the...
So which party should there be in?
Well, I've joined the SNP. You may have to form your own party. What I'm saying is, no, let me finish. I'm not going for honest. The tactics at the moment are quite clear. If you want to bust the state, and that means the Labour Party and the Tory Party, you've got to vote SNP in Scotland and get a maximum amount of SNP MPs into Westminster. That's the correct analysis of the situation. Right, a complete aside, I'll talk about something to my heart, right? I'm an old age pensioner. We have the lowest state pension in the European Union. The Labour Party have been in power for 13 years and never got us anywhere near what the French, the Germans and the Italians got. So I did my time in the British Army. If I'd done it in the German Army, I get double the pension I'm getting now. I mean, so there's all these things. That, I say, Neil, right, I agree, 98% of you got, I'm just saying you're in the wrong party. The situation has changed, and the situation changes, you've got to change your tactics to beat the enemy. You better start changing something, you'll be fast on your feet.
Sorry, I forgot the name again.
David Thomas.
David, you worked with my dad, didn't you? Yes. In Browns. I have to say I agree with you. That man sitting to my left should be the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland. Yes. He should be. Let me finish, just a second.
Thank God he isn't.
He should be, but he's not. And I have to say the reason I think he should be is because any democracy needs a viable opposition. And whilst Neil shares, and I probably do share a lot in common, and I would blunt, we lack a viable democratic opposition. I accept that. I mean, there's lots of vocal voices within the party, but there is an absolute democratic deficit in terms of an opposition which is fit for purpose. And honest to God, I do wish he had been elected, because it'd not just be good for the Labour Party in this part of the world, it'd be good for all of us. That's democracy. And I say that with all truthfulness. I was born into the Labour movement. You know my family background. You know what we've been through, like every other family, Jim, in this community. We all shared it. The days we used to stand at John Brown's gate waiting for them to come out. I was lucky I had a mother who stood there on a Friday afternoon waiting for a pay packet, her and 10 others, while the rest of them, with all due respect, gentlemen, usually pissed it up against a wall in Connolly's. So let's be blunt, whilst the days have changed, if somebody like Neil was a prominent and influential factor, we might have a better society all over round. I just wanted to put that in public record.
You say, I must say I find it very odd that someone who clearly believed in international socialism in the past now believes that you advance that through nationalism. That to me is just a complete it's a complete contradiction of ideology. And, well, it's a different belief from my belief, and we can agree to disagree in that, Comrade, I'm sure. You mentioned pensioners, and the last Labour government did a huge amount for pensioners. Huge amount. Pensioner poverty was outrageous when Labour came in, and yet there was minimum income guarantee, winter fuel allowance, free TV licences, pensioners, free eye tests, free bus travel, introduced by Labour, never forget. Free, it wasn't introduced by Labour. Free bus travel wasn't introduced by Labour. Yes. Free central heating in Scotland, cancelled by the SNP. Labour did nothing for pensioners. Let's not rewrite history, comrade. That's all I'm saying. No, maybe not, but I'll tell you, we moved dramatically in the right direction. And Martin said that you don't have a viable democratic opposition. The idea that there's democracy, any form of democracy, real democracy in the SNP, is something that people really need to scrutinise. because only a few weeks ago at their conference, they passed a disciplinary code at their conference behind closed doors, the media or no one else was allowed to see what went on, that says that no member that's elected for them is able to criticise policy or criticise another individual. Can you imagine in the Labour Party trying to close down the voice of the then Tony Benn, of Tam Dalyell, of Dennis Skinner, of Ken Livingstone, of John McDonnell, of Katie Clark and all of these people? That's not democracy, because these people's voices are essential in our democracy. You have to have people within your own party who are willing to critique your own policy, and only this week we've seen it. Last year we were told that to oppose the abolition of corroboration in criminal trials, Kenny McCaskill said the Labour Party was siding with the victims of crime. That's what he said. Can I tell you this? I would never, ever have voted for the abolition of corroboration, because the first miscarriage of justice that happened after that would have been in my conscience. And now, because there was criticisms from across the legal fraternity, across a whole range of organisations, that proposition has been binned, and rightly binned. And I commend Michael Matheson, the new Justice Minister, for doing that. It's the right thing to do. But not a public voice came forward from one MSP or one MP. That's where the difference is. Because if that had been Labour in government, you would have had people like me and others publicly saying, do not do this, it is wrong. So don't lecture one side about there being a democratic deficit when there is a huge democratic deficit in your own party. And can I say, since 2007, not one SNP MSP, to my knowledge, has broken the whip in that Parliament. Not one. Every day, no matter the issue, in they go and vote whatever the party tells them. That would never happen in the Labour Party. Sorry?
John Mason does it regularly.
No, he doesn't. He's never done it.
Can I ask a question? Please, just a couple of things I was going to ask, but you brought something up there about no private party. Are you honestly, Brendan Hart, telling me there wasn't one Labour MSP or MP that supported independence? Honestly? In your heart of hearts?
Not to my knowledge.
Right, okay.
Not to my knowledge. In my heart of hearts, I'll tell you that.
When was the democratic decision in the Labour Party to support the Better Together campaign taken?
People have got an individual, people can take an individual viewpoint. And let me say this to you, I never supported the Better Together campaign and publicly criticised it from day one. So that's the difference.
Right, okay, that's fine. Right, just to go back to the point I was going to say. I listened to your man there and I thought it was really good talking about what the Labour movement brought in, the NHS. But the Labour Party don't own the Labour movement. They've left us, they've gone. Most of the Labour movement are in the SNP. Okay? And I could ask you this, seriously, who would you rather go in coalition with, the Unionists, the Lib Dems or the SNP?
Can I say to you, in the same vein, you say that the Labour Party does not speak for the Labour movement. Can I tell you?
I said it doesn't own the Labour movement.
No, can I tell you, the SNP don't represent Scotland as they try to do. There's a diverse range of opinion in Scotland.
That's a totally different thing.
No, it's the same thing.
You were asking questions.
There's somebody chairing this meeting. I think it's better that we be polite and not let the lady chair the meeting. Sorry, your point was again, sorry, put me off my track.
Right. What I'm saying is that they don't own the Labour movement. Right, you say the SNP don't represent Scotland. Okay, yeah. Right, we'll find out in a couple of weeks.
No. But even if they win the election, they don't represent Scotland. They represent the people who voted for them.
Right, okay. So will Labour then represent Scotland if we're not getting MPs here?
Could I just ask
hold on, somebody's asked a question. I'm going to give them a chance to
Would
answer.
you rather the Labour Party, the UK Labour Party, right, I know you've got two different manifestos, but the UK Labour Party, right, would you rather they went into coalition with the Ulster Unionists and the Lib Dems to get David Miliband into Parliament, into down the street or rather going with the SNP. That's a bang straightforward.
We need to fly David Miliband back for New York, because since he's not standing in the election, so you know.
I don't make the facetious, Frank.
Well, I would prefer that we get a Labour majority and a Labour majority government. And that's the reality.
The question was who.
I'm not in the election to lose. We're not in the election to lose.
That's Jim Murphy's answer.
Hold on.
Can
I just ask where's Gemma going
Right. You know, I'd be as well not being here.
Exactly.
Right? There are people, I know there's other ones wanting to come back in, but what I want to do is get the people in that haven't been in first, okay? You want to come back on?
Yeah, I know, and just in terms of the demographic deficit, it's not the failure of the SNP that the Labour Party in Scotland can't get its act together in the Scottish Parliament, so with all due respect, I think that's not our problem, it's yours. In terms of the SNP representing the people of Scotland, there will be an election which will be held first past the post. Whoever wins the constituencies represent their constituency. So you'll forgive me if the vast majority of those constituencies return that happen to be SNP. It was all right that they expressed the will of the people back in 2010, being the Labour Party, but by God, it's a hell of a change that a pro-independence party now seeks, might possibly take a substantial amount of seats. Now, I for one wouldn't say that the SNP, the Labour Party in Scotland, the Conservatives in Scotland, the Liberals, and Jimmy, even the Communist Party, which my father used to be a member of himself here in Clydebank, represent the people of Scotland. You represent the people of Scotland, but the only way in which you in a liberal democratic society express your will in the Palace of Westminster is through the first past the post. And they kiboshed that during the last government when they wanted to bring forward reform, and they were all squabbled amongst themselves. So we actually might not be at this point if they don't actually agree in a democratic reform of the House of Commons. So the blunt point is, first past the post, winner takes it all. It's your system, we don't like it, I don't think the people of Scotland like it, let's just get on with it.
We had a referendum on the voting system. We had a referendum on the voting system and it was rejected. The people rejected it. Now, you see, it's a choice about which it refers to 2010. But we had a referendum on the voting system. We had a referendum last year and the people expressed their view. That's what happens in a democracy.
Gentleman at the back.
Neil, I know you get a lot of support from the trade unions throughout Scotland in respect to the leadership of the Labour Party. I remember for years myself, and growing up doing stairs, but leaflets, doors, and Tony Blair did get in. I thought he was going to throw the cloak off and say, right, let's get amongst this, but that didn't actually happen. So, chopped that a couple of years after that, I got a bit second it. So I'm not in the might vote for whatever party I might fancy vote for it. I'm not a member of any party. Again, the very, very kick-off he's given is very, very good. You know, indications of some of the social stuff that's going on within Scotland, and like the care contract, for example, I think it's outrageous. I was a convener of social, steward of the social work in Glasgow for a long, long, long time, and it watched all that happening. But what I would have to say is, it's the council that are giving these contracts out to these dodgy people. And understand you want to get back and say we need to be, don't need to, these conditions, these contracts can be conditional, right? And we'll leave that to the side because you might come back with a legal argument about it, which I'm not particularly understanding. The other bit is about this area of contracts where two things you ended up on. And somebody did mention about Blair's thing that it was in Zero's contract, it was in the manifesto, and in a number of manifestos I've found over the years. The issue for me is that, see if you lose the election, Labour, are you going to still say to people in West Dunbarton, we're going to do away with the zero-hours contracts? There are hundreds of people in West Dunbarton on zero-hours contracts. And when you raise it with the councillor, don't know anything about, as I have done, maybe in the Glencairn, the pubs in Dunbarton, they'll say, oh no, they're no zero-hours contracts, they're either, you know, they're sessional workers, or they're casual workers. You understand why they need sessional workers, because the grass only grows in the summer, understand stuff, understand temporary contracts, if people might go on mat leave, understand kind of part-time contracts, but there's no reason why these contracts shouldn't be released. So, and it's very, very convenient, and Ed Miliband seems to have plucked it there, it's a good deal for working-class people. Why did they introduce them for in the first place? And why don't they get rid of them? The new, and if they lose, and the SNPs who's got councils up down the country, you're actually talking about workers' rights. Should do something about it. You don't need the elections to do anything, friends.
Can I say I would agree? You're on a very, very good point, right? that on many of these things, you can do it now. We can do it now, and we don't need devolved rights, we don't need to wait on reserved powers to do it. We can do them in Scotland now. So
Even the local authorities,
some local local authorities are in a huge dilemma because we've had 8 years in underfunded council tax freeze. Local government is in crisis at the moment. I was a councillor for 9 years. I feel like weeping when I see the services that we've built up over the years and how they are being decimated. That's not through councillors making bad decisions. That's because councils are being bled dry by an underfunded council tax.
You still give people temporary part-time contracts with guaranteed years over a week.
No, let me come to that. No, I think that's absolutely right. So, for example, on social care, the reason those social care contracts are going out to the private sector is simply because of the financial situation. Now, if that was dealt with in a different way, and we actually said we're going to fully fund our local authorities, then we would be in a wholly different place. So that's absolutely connected to the way in which local government is being decimated. 40,000 jobs gone in local government, 40,000, it's absolutely outrageous. And can I say another example of how that could be changed? We had a procurement bill went through the Scottish Parliament. There's 10 billion or 11 billion of public money gets spent buying services. Or, it could be pencils for schools, it can be care, right? Whatever it is. We put through amendments in that procurement bill to say that all people working on public sector contracts should be paid the living wage. Now the Scottish Government says, we've got advice from the European Union, you can't do that. Well, you can do it. Because what you say is, you make fair pay a contract specification of the contract. And where that has been done, all of the contractors who are bidding for the contract pay the living wage. It can be done if there's a will to do it. The second thing we did was say, use that contract procurement to say that no 0 hours contracts should be used on public sector procurement. And the third thing we did was say, why are we giving public contracts to tax dodgers? Every one of those amendments was voted down by the current Scottish Government. We could have changed that, and they chose not to. And not a single SNP MSP voted for those 3 amendments.
Well, yeah, Jay. Well, we're going to disagree on the legal advice because Neil's legal advice, Neil's going to agree with. The Scottish Government legal advice, we're going to agree with. That's the situation. We believe that the legal advice we have been given is correct. That's the decision we will have to take. It's our responsibility to take the decision as the government of the day.
Why challenge it?
Well, that's up to those. I'll be quite clear when it comes to European Union. Sorry, what's your name?
A bit of respect, please.
Oh, Andy, you can shout Andy, that's fine, you're amongst friends, it's pretty worse than the other night with our hustings. But
sorry, is that an issue then?
No, just like she's saying, don't shout, give him respect.
I just said a bit of respect.
No, when it comes to 0 hours contracts, there is clearly a difficulty, and I disagree with you in terms of the legal advice. That's where we're at. But what I also disagree is the idea that we can start to stipulate wage controls in Scotland when we don't have the power for wage controls in Scotland. It has to be devolved. But I want to make some other kind of key points about that. We mentioned in terms of the published guidance for the public purchase promoting fair employment practices, including the living wage through public contracts. It's something that wasn't mentioned. And the guidance also embedded the statutory guidance in the public procurement. So that was done. But our stance is that we have been given advice that is contrary to European law. And we can't, you say challenge it, but I've yet to see major, not devolved governments challenge European legislation at that level.
Can I just come back?
Would this advice be different if we actually had independence?
Sorry, I did say I was going to let people
I don't know the
that
answer
hadn't
to that. Be blunt
been
with you, I don't know the answer to that.
Young lads there.
My name's Alistair. I've actually come here from Greenock. I've seen a post on Facebook from a friend.
You're keen.
Not so much. I've seen a post on Facebook from a friend on Facebook.
You'll probably get home tomorrow.
The kind of tagline of the debate was to represent interest of the working class. Now, to kind of bring it back to that, I've kind of heard the Labour versus SNP, Labour versus SNP.
So you can speak up.
Sorry, I'll be louder. I've kind of heard the Labour versus SNP, the Labour versus SNP kind of debate. You mentioned, obviously the questions for you, Neil said plenty. I voted no in the referendum. The reason I did that is because I believe that national interest isn't compatible with the interests of the working class. You mentioned in your speech at the start about this kind of new politics. This kind of national dint to socialism isn't really new. Lenin went on about this kind of socialism in one country. And if you take the experience of the DDR and their experiences of trying to raise a border to have a socialist country, it doesn't really work out. So my question is, how is national interest compatible with considering the interests of working class people?
Good question. Go for it. Well, the DDR certainly wasn't a good example of it, that's for sure.
No, sorry, I'll just interrupt and say you could say after the fall of the DDR that a uniformed or united Germany is probably more socialist than what the DDR were.
I don't think I mentioned socialism in my opening gambit.
Alright.
So you'll need to correct me. I'll stand corrected if I mention socialism in my opening gambit. I come back, as I said in my opening statement, that I believe the sovereignty of this country lies in front of me. And that's a critical point for me, is whether you want to call me a socialist or a social democrat, make your mind up. My sovereignty belongs in my community. That's where I get my political belief. It's a community that dictates the terms of the decisions that I make. And that is problematic even for the political party in which I am a member. I believe that sovereignty is best exercised as locally as possible. That to me means an independent sovereign parliament. You forgive me for being a member who believes, someone who believes in independence. There's many people both in the Labour Party and even in the Liberal Democrats, even in the Conservative Party, who probably did vote yes. But I believe that that sovereignty is best placed and best fit in terms of this debate, Janet, with an independent nation. Now, Scotland voted no. I'm afraid to remind you that West Dunbartonshire voted yes. But the critical element of a new politics is one that is not based either on fear or acrimony, or we have statements being made, for instance, about the First Minister based on gender, where misogyny is rife and where we are open to debates. That's a critical element as well. And that means that democracy for me, as I say, lies here. And it dictates the decisions I could make. For instance, I won't walk through a lobby of the House of Commons to cap child benefit. Why? Because traditionally the poorest families might have, they say, the larger families. So why would I want to make sure that the poorest families struggle the most because we cap child benefit? You talked about workers' rights. The workers' rights are also to defend the working poor's rights, not just workers who may, with all respect, be at top end, but those workers who are struggling, who might have more than 2 kids. And take my word for it, quite a lot of them in Clydebank. So I certainly won't be voting for policies like that. I don't know if I actually answered your question, to tell you the truth. I don't think I did. It was quite an in-depth one. I might need to take it away and think about it a wee bit more in depth.
We'll leave your details at the end of the
we'll try and get into it. But I come back to the idea of where it's critical is that democracy lies in the heart of the community. That defines it.
Well, at the start, I don't know if you're kind of obfuscated about it. You can call me a socialist, you can call me a social democrat. What do you call yourself? Do you call yourself a socialist?
You shouldn't have to think about that.
But you know, I've never had to think about it.
Well, that's a what I would about to vote for you.
Can I answer? So bear with me a wee second, Neil. Bear with me a wee second. We'll answer it as best I can. Well, it's actually a very profound question. It's a profound question. Well, forgive me for... Yeah, no, I'll maybe come back to that in a second. If, for instance, you vote Labour, can you call yourself a socialist? Just bear with my train of thought here. If you vote for the SNP can you call your socialist? If you're a member of the Communist Party, can you truthfully call yourself a socialist? It's my well, some would say that you're a communist rather than a socialist, but I'm either a Trotskyist or a Leninist.
You obviously haven't studied Karl Marx. Let me finish,
Jeanette. I pigeonhole myself in the politics in which I was informed in, and that's the politics that my father taught me. It's the politics my mother taught me. And it was the experience growing up in this community. Does that mean that I'm a socialist?
Yeah.
Probably does. But does it mean I'm a Marxist socialist? I'd reject that out of hand. Does it mean I believe that liberal democracy is the most effective means of expressing the democratic will of a large community? Yes, it probably does. Do I believe in policies that support working people? Yes, it does. Does it mean that I'd walk through the lobbies to vote for Trident? By God, no, I won't be voting for Trident. So define me by the state, but define me by the decisions I take, not a banner I might want to carry. I believe in independent Scotland because I believe those decisions are best placed in this community, not in the Palace of Westminster, not with politics. And Neil's right about, for instance, the Lobbying Act that you mentioned. I actually was very vocal about the support that was required for Neil's endeavours in terms of the Lobbying Act, because I actually think it should have went further. Because we started off there, I know I'm digressing, but I just want to get to the nib of this part. We have a society in Scotland where we have not just large private businesses, but I come back to the point I made earlier, where we have charitable bodies making a buck off the backs of the working poor. And I have to say, I think the Lobbying Act should have went further. Because there's substantial charities in this country make people on 60 to 80 grand a year with 10 staff. You know, it's just mind-boggling in the charitable sector. I'm sure I haven't answered your question because it's still, I've been thinking about it, Jim, for nearly 30 years. And I find it very difficult.
It's a long university.
It is. But you'll forgive me, at least when we've ended tuition fees, so maybe put that as a statement of intent, that education is free at the point of entry, and that prescription charges, whilst they are free, are paid for through direct taxation, and that's a political decision. Judge me in the political decisions that I would take, and judge the political party I belong in the political decisions. What you call them or what you define them are up to you, not to me.
I know it's not directed at me, but I'll be absolutely clear. I'm a socialist, I'm a proud trade unionist, I'm working class, and I have always had that philosophy of socialism, and that working people are better united. The Labour movement is the strongest and most powerful force against reactionary forces, and that we split the Labour movement along national lines at our peril, and I think that is a danger. And I believe that the divisions in our society are the same divisions that they've always been. They're the divisions based on which class you are. That's the reality of the division. The division is not whether you stay on this side or that side of the border. The decision is which class you are, because that determines the rest of your life. And that's the difference, I think, between myself and Martin. He says he's been thinking about the question for 30 years. I think he's been thinking about it for 30 seconds, because if you've not come up with a position based on whether it's reading or education or self-education or listening to people in your community, listening to influential people, whether it be your family or your friends, people at work, people in trade unions or whatever, and you've not come to that conclusion, then I think there's something wrong. Now, I understand that people may move their position over the years, and we've heard the Comrade there say he's moved his position.
I'm a communist, but I mean, okay, I don't understand. No, but tactics at the moment.
No, well, that's.
But there's other people wanting to.
But that's a difference of opinion with her. But I think it is a fundamental question about how you view the world.
You can't pigeonhole people.
I'm saying
if a socialist party vote for Trident.
I'm saying it's a fundamental position that you have to come to.
But if you're a socialist, how can a socialist sit in a party? Sorry, how can a socialist sit in a party?
You've already spoken.
Right.
I'm going to ask, how can a socialist sit in a party that votes for Trident?
Jeanette.
I can't understand that.
Right, ma'am, you want to...
Do you know, the fact that I struggle, I think, is a good thing. Because human beings struggle. You know, when I read Marx, and I've read them, I actually didn't agree with quite a lot of it. Because most of these policies are written by men. And I'm going to go back to this, the politics of misogyny and gender, and the idea of when I used to stand with my mother on a Friday afternoon when all the men coming out the yard. And I used to see it. And a lot of men don't like the politics that's arriving. And I'll be quite blunt. And I'll tell you why, because it gets to the core of a lot of the politics that men are at the heart of. As a man, I know I find it problematic myself. We don't live in Lenin's idea of a socialist democracy. We don't live in the 1800s of Karl Marx, the man who lived in a nice fancy suburb in London. We live in the communities that we define ourselves by. And to me, that's the west of Scotland, and it could be Clydebank, it could be the Vale. I live in White Inch, for instance. You know, so why do I struggle? Because it is a struggle. It's a personal struggle. And I don't have any shame about putting that personal struggle on this table, because the continued debate within the working class about who's best to defend it. The best people to defend the working class isn't the Labour Party or the SNP, it's the working class. And we need to make, if we are working class, choices based on the policies brought forward by parties that approach us within a liberal democracy. Now, if you want to vote for candidates who agree with renewing £100 billion worth of Trident, and I know Neil doesn't agree with it, but his local Labour candidate does, and made it quite clear at the hustings both on Tuesday night that they are determined to vote for the renewal of Trident. There's £100 billion I'd rather see spread across not just Scotland, but the whole of these islands. Yes, if you want to use the language, yes, comrade, for every working family. And also to go back to the cap on child benefit. If you believe that working families should be denied child benefit, then don't vote for me. Don't vote for an SNP candidate, because by God, it's a direct challenge to working families, the length and breadth of these islands, whether it's from Plymouth or to Lerwick, from Radnor Park to the Bone Hill. It's a direct challenge to working families, families who choose for a parent to stay at home. And it was made, I know some of you were there last night and saw the debate in which was going in terms of the question that was posed by a woman in the body of the kirk who said, what are you going to do for working families where a parent stays at home? And we all went along the line and we all said, oh, it's great, we're all going to put on childcare. That wasn't the question. The question was, what if a parent or a carer, that could be a grandparent, stays at home? And I made it quite clear that I'll vote for the increase in childcare, but by God, I won't be voting for £100 billion when that can sustain getting rid of a cap on welfare and also a cap on child benefit. That's a direct challenge to the working class in this country.
Can I pick up on something? I hope I didn't hear what you said right, Martin. Because I think what you said was that you stood at the gates of the yards and watched as men came out who were spouting misogyny, and that's what shaped some of those people. I don't live in this area, but I find that offensive, because I think what would have shaped those men was their bitter struggles at work, their industrial experience, the grindy living round about here in those times. That's what would have shaped them. To say that it was misogyny that shaped them in that society, I think is an appalling thing to say. And I'm sorry I'm saying it so robustly, but I do think that is an appalling thing to say.
Well, sorry Chair, I just come back on that. Maybe in the heat of the moment it didn't come out as it should have. But let me be quite clear. The large family I came from, and the times in which my mother dealt with the outcome of the misogyny that was dealt with by women across this community. And it informs the politics which we see, where we believe that it's all right to cap welfare and also to cap child benefit. That itself is a politics of misogyny, because let's be blunt, the majority of carers in families are women. They're the ones that are getting hit the worst by austerity. And I'll come back to the point that Neil made earlier, that the local Labour candidate didn't vote for austerity. let's go back to a publication which I mentioned last night from Her Majesty's Treasury. Back in December 2014, it stipulated that the parties that signed up to the Charter for Budget Responsibility was to meet the fiscal mandate and supplementary debt target set out in the updated Charter. The government estimates that the current forecasts around 30 billion of discretionary consolidation is likely to be required over the following 2 years, 16 to 17, 17 and 18. You walked through the doors together and they voted for it. That's impacting women in my community because they're the ones who feel it the most. That to me, whether you agree with it or not, and yeah, you're probably right, I probably worded it wrong, Neil, but that's a politics of misogyny because it's a politics against women and that needs to change.
I'm glad to hear that you managed to stand outside John Brown's because I was out
Well,
here.
she used to put the GPO box up outside it.
I was out here.
I worked inside it.
I was out here to stand outside there, not to get knocked down by a car or a tram car, but by the guys coming out the gate. Young lad up the back wants to come in.
Cheers to Neil.
So you're looking at me.
Question for Neil. Over the last few weeks, the elections kind of turned round with all the parties and all the media seem to be rhetoric towards Scotland is terrible, particularly the SNP. You would think that we're a bunch of terrorists rather than an actual party that, with all probability, going to have around about 50 out of 59 elected MPs in Scotland going to Westminster. Your face can do that, but the polls show there's going to be upwards of 45, probably upwards of 50 MPs will go to Westminster. Now, last September, Better Together and everybody else that was for no said that we were a marriage made in heaven, that we're equal partners, etc., etc. So how come only a few months later we are now not supposed to have a voice, we're not supposed to be heard, we're supposed to sleep on the couch, and if we want our dinner we go to a food bank? What's your thoughts on it?
Is your question about the media?
My question is about Labour not wanting. Everybody knows it's going to be a hung parliament, so why are Labour not wanting to have anything to do with the SNP?
The first issue you raised was at the media, and the issue, and I will come to that directly, but it shouldn't surprise us what the media are capable of, and whether that's the print media or now social media, because some of the things that went on and have gone on over the last couple of years in our media have been utterly appalling, utterly disgraceful. Now, I've been a personal victim of that on many occasions, and I'm big enough and ugly enough to take it. I'm sure you all agree I'm ugly enough. And with the community I'm brought up in the street that I live in, I get worse with my pals in the street, or in the pub or whatever. So I can take it. But some of it is vile, and some of the way in which your political debate is being conducted at the moment is very unbecoming of what many people believe was a very good democratic event that we had last year. But there's an element of that that's not good. And I think all of us need to wake up to that and admit that. Now that's spilling over now. Now don't be surprised. Don't be surprised in the slightest if the Daily Mail and whatever other gutter newspapers decide to have a go at the SNP because they're leading in the polls or whatever. They will do whatever they can to get a Tory government in. That's their role. That's why they were created. That's why they exist. Unfortunately, we kind of just have to live with that. That's why I tell you to buy them honest. That's a far better choice. In terms of the hung parliament and all the rest of it, not a vote has been cast. Not a vote has been cast. And having well, they're counted. You're way ahead of it. Counted.
Ruth Davison knows his vote anyway.
We all think she knows. So not a vote's been counted, and I think it's very premature to suggest what might happen, because having observed elections for the last 20 or 30 years, local and national, it is not a game that I would wish to predict very often.
Well, can I ask you one direct question, which has been asked by just about just about every Jacob person who's been on TV over the last couple of weeks? If it's a hung parliament, if SNP have, as predicted, around about 50 MPs in Westminster, would Labour join forces with SNP to keep the Tories out of Downing Street?
Well, I don't see that happening.
I didn't ask you that.
No, I don't.
Okay, hypothetically, that's what happens. Yes or no?
No party goes into an election
Yes
saying
or no?
no party goes into an election saying we're in this election to be defeated. So
That's not what I'm asking.
well, that's the answer I'm giving you. I am not
So you're
going
refusing to answer?
I'm refusing to get into a debate about what might happen when not a vote has been cast. Yes, if you're asking me, am I refusing to get into that? Yes, that's the answer.
People that Neil and I share common interests, common themes, and you know.
I'm beginning not to think so.
Well, we do. You know, I think there's a commonality there, so I'd be happy to do that. But you know, we've all made it quite clear we wouldn't work in a formal coalition. I don't think that would serve either of us very well, or the people that elect us. We've been quite clear about way back in November that we would be involved in that. Neil's right in terms of you get broad shoulders in terms of the stuff that goes on in social media. And I go back to the misogynistic garbage that has been thrown. I'm sorry, I will go on about it. Because it's consistently thrown at people in not just the First Minister. Joanne Lamont got it when she was leader of the Labour Party in the Scottish Parliament. And it was appalling the way in which she was pilloried, even by some of my colleagues. I thought it was disgraceful. That kind of politics has to end. You know, and I'd be quite happy to work with colleagues in the Labour Party to achieve that in the House of Commons. So I don't see any problem with that.
Can I come in and make a point? Sorry, let the lady.
Yeah,
Leave at the front here and then
Thanks. Well, we're going to be voting in a couple of weeks' time, and I think we should remember that the British ruling class didn't give us the vote. The vote itself had to be hard fought for, and it was trade unionists and it was social reformers working together, communities working together, and women who got us that vote. It was very, very, very hard fought for, and it's a very, very precious thing that we're going to have in 2 weeks, particularly when you think that next week the Sunday Times is going to bring out the rich list, and you'll find the wealth that's been accrued by the rich in this government. And we know about the food banks that people that we know have to use. Now, my grandmother spent most of her life without a vote, so it's that recent and it's that precious. We're going to have to make a decision in a couple of weeks, and in my opinion, the working class can't afford to have another Conservative government. We've got a clear choice. Are we going to get rid of them, or are we going to try to get rid of them? Are we definitely going to get rid of that government? The one impediment to a Labour government being returned in the next general election will be the votes in Scotland. And so we've got a huge responsibility in terms of how we cast our vote in 2 weeks. Now, that same grandmother that I'm thinking about used to talk to me about how disillusioned people were when the national government was formed. When Ramsay MacDonald crossed the House, the floor in the House of Commons, and people were saying, the Labour Party's finished, it's gone, finished. Tonight we heard of all the things that the Labour Party has done for the working class, and we have pushed and pulled the Labour Party in the direction that we wanted it. So it's been a two-way thing, but had people not been prepared to fight for the Labour government to introduce progressive policies, we wouldn't have had all the things that we talked about tonight, Equal Pay, Health and Safety at Work Act and all the other things, as well as the vote. And I would ask people tonight who've said the Labour Party's done, it's over. We had the Ramsay MacDonald incident, we had the Gateskill years, followed by the 70s when the British ruling class got the threat of their life when they realised how close we were to obtaining greater state power in the interests of working people. So I think we have to consider that the history of the Labour Party has been up and down, and it's been up and down in terms of the impact that we've had on them. And you're right when you talk about the people having the power. Working class have the power, and the only power that we can use in a couple of weeks is for us to use our vote for the Labour Party in order to return a Labour government, and as a friend sitting here beside me said, and then push for even more progressive policies from the Labour government. My last point is, you made the point that you can't challenge an EU law. Why can you not challenge an EU law? What kind of independence is that? And if we can't challenge any, the EU Parliament doesn't make the laws, it doesn't even bring the laws, it rubber stamps the laws that are decided by the Commission, who aren't even elected. How can we not challenge that? And I would like the candidates, I would like you both to comment on the question of British sovereignty, our sovereignty, my right as a citizen to have my elected representatives making the decisions that are that I elected them to do, because that is me safeguarding the vote that was hard fought for all these years ago. If we don't challenge EU decisions, if we don't look at what they're planning regarding TTIP, then what is our vote worth?
On TTIP, throw that one into.
Oh, that was a big one. That was a big one. You'll forgive me if I'm not going to say that I'm going to vote for the Labour Party in the forthcoming general election. I think you raised a whole range of issues in terms, first of all, the last one you mentioned about sovereignty. There is no such thing as the sovereign people of Britain. You don't even have a parliament which is sovereign. We don't even have a written constitution. So there's a huge failure in terms of British democracy and its inability. And with all respect to those governments for the last 100 years who have failed to reform British democracy for one reason or another, I'm not a member of their political parties, and I'll leave it to them to tell you why none of those political parties have brought about a fundamental change in the constitutional framework of the sovereignty of the British state. Also in terms of coalition, well, forgive me, but the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats seem to hold a very cohesive parliamentary majority, and I'm sure from their perspective a very effective coalition government within the Scottish Parliament in the first years of the Scottish Parliament. That was what people voted for, and that's what they got. They got a working majority. So I disagree with you about either coalition or alliances, because it very clearly worked in the Scottish Parliament, because you've got to remember that's how it was set up. It was supposedly that no party could get an overall majority. I actually quite like that type of politics. It makes you think. And yeah, maybe sometimes I do wish we had, we didn't have a majority in the Scottish Parliament at the moment. We didn't in our previous administration, and we worked with people. Actually worked with people across the floor.
Tories.
With everybody, Neil. With everybody. You know, and to say that we can't have either coalition or alliances, I'm sorry, I disagree with you, because the experience for both the Liberal-Labour coalition in Scotland worked very effectively for them. So I don't see why that type of approach couldn't work within the British Parliament, within a mature setting and a mature democracy. But that needs reform. And that needs reform of the House of Commons. It needs an end to the House of Lords, where, you know, we talked about the issue of socialism, where socialists supposedly go into an unelected chamber. You know, and I find that an affront to what we call democracy. So there are ultimate challenges, there are huge challenges we face, but I'm afraid that I won't be voting for the Labour Party come the 7th of May.
A few things there. You raised a number of questions, I think it's really important. I do find it odd that, for example, Nicola Sturgeon will say that she wants a Labour government, but the way to get a Labour government is to vote Green in England, Plaid Cymru in Wales and SNP in Scotland. That's supposedly the way in which you get a Labour government. I mean, I don't think anyone, I don't think anybody with a sat-nav could follow that logic. In terms of coalitions, well, the same thing happened from 2007 to 2011 in Scotland, because the SNP had a deal with the Tories for every budget and every vote that they needed through in that Parliament. They worked hand in glove with the Tories for 4 years. So again, let's not rewrite history, but I think you raise a very important point in the European Union. Because I think the European Union is in danger of eating itself. And what I mean by that is that when we see decisions being taken by the Commission or whoever that are so far away from the lives of working people and or ordinary people in communities like this, yet they have an impact on their life, then what confidence can you have in that institution to change? Who's running that institution? Where's the democratic accountability to that institution? I think it is in a really precarious place if it continues to impose law on its member states that is totally contrary, or not totally contrary, because I'm sure a lot of that the Tories like, if it's in workplace issues and whatever. But I think we are in a very, I think we have to be very careful, and the European Union has to be very careful as to how it proceeds and how it reforms itself to become more democratic.
Hold on. I know you were at Browning there, but I don't know if you were in for the debate, but I actually did speak against TTIP on behalf of the Trade Council. I'm also on the STUC General Council, and it will be, I'll make sure that it's continued on and get back to the Trade Council what's happening with it. Right, lady up here and then Tommy.
My name's Jo, and I find it quite ironic that you're saying about working class, because there's quite a lot of MPs that have never been working class in their life. However, that's not the point I want to raise. People are getting sick of politicians now, because all they do is slag each other off. You think nowadays they'd be willing to work for our benefit, which is the Scottish people. Our votes, when we vote, aren't going to count for anything in Westminster, because we're not going to have the same turnout as what happened for the independence. Quite a lot of the young people just do not care about what any of you say, because you have lost touch with the people. You can sit and say, slag each other off to your heart's to be, we do this and we do that, but that doesn't benefit us at the end of the day. Unfortunately, what's going to happen is SNP are probably going to get most of the votes up here, because people hate the Tories and they're losing faith in Labour. But that's not going to have any effect down south, because Labour and Conservative are the only parties down south that are going to get the votes. Maybe UKIP now are going to start getting votes, which is scary, because all the pensioners of my dad's age down in England are going to vote UKIP, because they're in that generation where they don't see the big picture for the rest of the country. And if UKIP get their votes, they're going to be part of the government.
Heaven help us all.
But then that's unfortunately, no one else is willing to sit and say that. You're not Labour's not saying you're not going to be in a coalition. You're never going to get in that government. Unfortunately, I don't see how you seriously think you're going to get votes that are going to put you in a clear majority to become the major party. I honestly don't see that. But,
okay.
But if that is the case, if it isn't, then there's going to be a split party. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't matter what our votes do, because down south votes cancel all ours. You're going to get SNP, but that's not going to make up the majority of the Parliament. So it's going to be whoever else is left. Labour, Conservative or UKIP.
Well,
there's no other parties that are going to be...
Let's just see what happens. I mean, there's no vote being cast. And that's why I say don't preempt what's happening. The polls are looking across the UK. It looks as though Labour is going to be at least the biggest party. I mean, that's been quite consistent and growing. What I might go back a wee bit though, and you say that you know about working class representation. I think that's a very, very important thing, hugely important thing, because there is not enough working class MPs in the UK Parliament. Can I tell you, in the Scottish Parliament, particularly for the Labour Party, that is quite different. I'm a bricklayer to trade, very proud of it. There's people in here who are welders, admin assistants. There's people there who've worked in shops. One of my colleagues worked in Tesco before she came into the Scottish Parliament. There's a whole range of people. It's much more diverse in that Labour group than we have at a UK level. But I think it's a very important thing that parties across the UK have to address. And there's positive moves within the Labour Party to change that, like we had to do when there was not enough women represented in Parliament. We took a position of positive discrimination over 20 years ago to ensure that there was more women in Parliament. Martin's party have just taken that decision to increase the number of women in Parliament. So I'm not having a go at that. I hugely welcome it. You didn't want to finish. I hugely welcome it, the fact that we're taking positive steps to make Parliament more representative. And I think there is a consideration that will have to be made in the future about how we get more working class people into Parliament. Now, the second thing I want to say is, you say that you've lost touch with people.
Yes.
I disagree with that, and I can only speak for myself. I disagree with that 100%. Because of the activity that I've got on in my community, who I speak to on a day in, day out basis, the organisations that I meet, the fact that I'm out and about in my community, and do almost as, I can't think anything more I can do that will allow people to contact me, whether that's through social media, whether that's having a permanent office. People are in and out all the time. Now the view, you're all the same, you have no contact with normal people and you don't represent me. Well, let me say from my personal point of view, I would challenge that 100%.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Neil in quite a lot of that, you know, because I'm not going to sit here and slag him as an individual, as a person, and I know his commitment to many of the issues that, you know, that he does. I mean, I don't believe in that type of politics. Frankly, I'd rather spend my time doing something else than just slagging somebody for the mere fact that I might slightly disagree with them in a range of issues. I don't think it's useful. In terms of the House of Commons, the political party which commands the largest majority should be the government of the day. That's the principle of the House of Commons, and that is a possibility. And Neil's right, though, and I have to also say in terms of the engagement, since the referendum, whatever side you voted on, I don't know about you, but you know, it's unbelievable, the engagement with the individuals. You know, Neil's right, the vast majority of MSPs across the board in the Scottish Parliament are from our communities. You know, the closer they are, the more difficult it is for them to escape the scrutiny of the communities in which they represent. You know, and that is, there are fundamental flaws, again, in the House of Commons, the Palace of Westminster. And Neil's right about the SNP when it came to women's votes, because that took far too bloody long. And, you know, I'm sure the Labour Party went through the exact same debate 20 years ago about, you know, the improvements that needed to be made in governance, because frankly some of the debate I heard about the movement of equality for women candidates and selection were frankly appalling. Appalling. So, you know, well, done now, thank God, but far too late as far as I was concerned. Should be done bloody years ago. So I think there's commonality in that. In terms of Scottish Parliament, there is a high level of engagement. I know a lot of Labour MSPs in terms of the work that I've done in my life. A lot of Labour councillors, SNP councillors at the back, SNP members, and they are highly engaged in their communities. They really are. So, you know, I think, you know, we commend a lot of the work that they do. We might disagree in policy, but in terms of some of the actual activity done by them physically themselves in their own communities has to be commended.
Well, if that's the case, then why can't you nowadays just work together? Instead of having all the arguments, why can't you have your point of view, and that would benefit all the people?
Can I say,
tell you where they're going?
Can I just say that we've only got the room until 9 o'clock, and I was wanting to try and get Tommy in.
Can I say one wee thing? Just that what is missing from what you're saying is, and what the public don't see a lot of the time, is actually politicians do work together a lot. So in committees of the Scottish Parliament, cross-party groups, on a whole range of issues, politicians from across the political spectrum work together. What you see often is the public profile, question time, elections, folk scratching each other's eyes out, metaphorically of course, in the run-up to election. That's just the heat of battle. A lot of the time there is genuine cross-party work going on to take forward legislation and stuff like that. So I know you don't see it, and I know that's a frustration for members of the public, but it does go on a lot of the time, as it does in local authorities.
Tommy?
Well, I want to answer that question of why Gemma Dawes not here. It's been asked a few times over the last couple of weeks, and I've talked to Martin about it before the start of the meeting. The reason is, as Secretary of the Trades Council, it was my responsibility to get the speakers for this meeting. And just to be clear, it was not a hustings meeting. If it was a hustings meeting, we'd need to invite them all. We didn't want to waste time on stories and levels. We want to shoot from the left. We're on workers' rights. And we picked this time because the Scottish Trade Union Congress has just met this week in Ayr. Some of us were down there. So here we are, just meeting after, if you like, the Workers' Parliament. We just met in Scotland. The reason we asked Neil was we did a commitment out of Neil to speak in Clydebank. Neil has a long history of working for victimised workers, victimised minors, blacklisted workers. And I asked Bill Kidd, who's my MSP, who I've also worked in CND, for a speaker, and Martin Dunbartonshire. And it just so happens that Martin's the parliamentary candidate for the SNP. So that's how we arrived at this position. If I could just refer to the STC, which took place at the beginning of this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had visits from Nicola Sturgeon and also Ed Miliband. If I could refer to Ed Miliband first, clearly he's made a break with New Labour. They had made reference to the House of Lords. He announced about abolition of the House of Lords, and clearly there's a shift in policy. He's not left wing as I want, but it's a start. Nicola Sturgeon agreed with many of the points she made, especially on Trident, and Clydebank Trades Council moved the motion to scrap Trident at the STUC. The two disappointments, or maybe the disappointment we were expecting it, but the two areas we were concerned about was one was on the anti-trade union laws, which we referred to tonight. I mean, the reason anti-trade union laws was brought in by Thatcher was she recognised that the organised working class through the trade union movement was the biggest bulwark against the introduction of neoliberal policies. That's why she brought them in. That's why Tony Blair did not repeal them. And for such a meeting, these politicians should have addressed, I believe, that point. The other one which has been raised tonight is the European Union, because the fact is you cannot have an independent Scotland if you're going to remain within the European Union. And we've already had some evidence of this tonight about what happened in the railways, because the directives and the treaties of the European Union will preclude any attempt to renationalise industries. But both Ed Miliband and the SNP support membership of the European Union, and many in the trade union movement, that is a big weakness, and neither of them address these points. So that was really the issue I want to raise. I've just been, George has just asked me to make the point, if you could put a few pennies in the hat to help the cause tonight, that would be appreciated. So thanks very much for two speakers for coming along. Thanks, George.
Can I just thank Neil and Martin, thank the rest of you for coming, and remind you, so I've got a vote in 2 weeks' time. Use it, because as I've always said to my own branch members, if you don't use the vote, don't complain about it afterwards.
Thanks to the chair.